May the words that I speak and the inspiration of our hearts be acceptable to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. How many of you, I wonder, are currently in conflict with another person? Maybe with a family member or a coworker, a friend, a neighbor. Perhaps you're in conflict with someone in this congregation. Maybe right now you have several conflicts on the go in one shape or another. If this sounds familiar, you may share my opinion that conflict can be exhausting and incredibly time-consuming. It can deplete you of energy you did not know you still possessed. Maybe you're also familiar with the sensation of guilt in the face of far wider conflicts, war, famine, climate crises. In the face of these, maybe you tell yourself that you should not feel upset by other people, yet you still do, because after all, they are human and so are you. For many years, I have worked professionally as a mediator. I come alongside people from all walks of life amidst all sorts of conflicts. These can be workplace disputes, divorce settlements, conflicts between neighbors, within communities, between them. For the past few years, I've been working intensively with survivors of abuse and the institutions that have harmed them. As a mediator, I spend my days bringing people together and helping them to have very difficult discussions. It's a huge privilege to make a living from work that I love. I never take for granted the trust that is placed in me, and I never cease to marvel at the courage of people as they decide, however reluctantly, to navigate new pathways through long-standing pain. A lot of my work is within churches, across many denominations. Church conflicts are really fascinating for all sorts of reasons that I won't go into here. You can ask me later. Anecdotally, I can tell you that Christians in general and Anglicans in particular have really honed the art of passive aggression. Conflict is simply part of living alongside other people. Today's gospel reading encourages us to take seriously the work of being human. Jesus sets out a process for addressing conflict within a community. If another member of the church sins against you, go and point out the fault when the two of you are alone. If you are not listened to, take others along with you. If the member refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if the offender refuses to listen even to the church, let such a one be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. This is hardly the most beautiful writing in the Bible. A Scottish theologian named William Barclay has pointed out that these verses sound less like something Jesus would actually say and more like the regulations of a church committee. I have to say that I agree. To me, the passage also reads a bit like a technical manual with escalating consequences that lead, in the worst case, to exclusion from a community. Jesus describes a conflict and a process that may sound a bit clinical, but what would happen if we were to pause here and try to tell a different story about it? We can start with the text right in front of us. Here at St. James's Piccadilly, the Bible translation that we use is the New Revised Standard Version, which tends to favor gender-inclusive language. For today's reading, the translation refers to a member of the church and eventually the offender. Yet in the original Greek, the word used is adelphos, which means brother. What difference might it make to read this passage not through the lens of membership, but through a more sustained understanding of family? How might that change our experience of a rift in the community? We can also look to the larger arc of Matthew's Gospel. Today's reading appears between two of the most beautiful and well-known passages. Immediately before, Jesus tells the parable of the lost sheep with its theme of God's unrelenting love. Immediately following is a reflection on forgiveness. Peter asks, "How often should I forgive?" And Jesus answers, "Not 7 times, but 77 times." And let's remember that when Jesus instructs us to treat the offender as a Gentile or a tax collector, we also know that these are the people that he healed, people with whom he dined. Jesus loved Gentiles and tax collectors too. He enfolded them in his community. So a more capacious reading of this gospel passage gives us not a technical process, but a summons to try again and again and again to remain in relationship with each other. We hear that each person matters, that dialogue between individuals is crucial. We hear about the importance of communicating directly and clearly, perhaps with the assistance of a witness or a mediator. We hear the call to restore our relationships and to keep trying with persistence and with love. But sometimes there are relationships that cannot be restored, at least not in the time frame we would hope for, perhaps not on this side of eternity. In my work as a mediator, I see what happens when people feel pushed too hard and too fast into trying. I have seen expectations for resolution and reconciliation turn toxic. Too often, I am asked to take cases in which a conflict was declared resolved, only for tensions to erupt down the line. Too often, I hear from people that they felt pressured to forgive and to be reconciled publicly, long before they were ready. For the people involved and for their communities, the effects of this can be devastating. I spend a lot of time listening to the stories that people tell about conflict. Sometimes it can feel inevitable that we ended up in this place of utter discord. It can feel that we will never find our way out of the mess. It can feel that we are trapped in narratives from which we cannot escape. As I listen to these stories, I am also listening for how they are told. What is repeated? What is omitted? What feels murky as I listen to it? Where is greater honesty needed about history, about hope and regret and desire? Where might we find flexibility and scope for movement, no matter how small? It's a bit like mapping a new constellation, and I often tell people that we are trying to do just that. Together, we are trying to generate new perspectives about what has gone wrong in the past. We are trying to understand what needs to be said or done in the present, and we do this to find new ways of relating with each other going into the future. But there are times when it's not enough to keep on trying. Sometimes it's simply not safe for people in conflict to communicate with each other, let alone directly. As a mediator, I am vigilant about the safety of the process. If it's not safe to proceed, we don't. If you are sitting here today with a broken relationship that seems unmendable, this does not need to be a dead end to the story. It is not failure. Today's gospel passage may be calling us to the difficult work of dialogue. This is an important message, but it's not the only story that we can tell about this passage. Above all, in these words, we hear Jesus' longing for a restored community. The conflict described in today's reading rests within the wider gospel story, one that is drenched in love for lost sheep, full of infinite forgiveness, peopled with Gentiles and tax collectors who join us around the table. The broken relationships in our own lives, even when they feel to us like failures, can be transformed by these stories. Our hopes and our longings, even when they feel fruitless, are already reshaping the conflicts that we carry. As Christians, we experience this every time we participate in the sacrament of the Eucharist, just as we will in a few minutes' time. We will come to the table just as we are, carrying with us our finite human stories of conflict and broken relationships, our hopes for what might have been, our longing for a different future. In the Eucharist, we offer these stories to God, that they may be transformed and incorporated into God's eternal story of grace and love and reconciliation. Amen.